Sarabjot, please.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. I hope your stomachs are full, but I'm sure the brains are yearning for more. To quench our knowledge thirst, we are honored to have a highly decorated condensed matter physicist, an epitome of women's strength, Dr. Tulika Mehta, Professor, Department of Physics, IIT Roorkee, amongst us. Welcome, ma'am. Professor Mitra completed her PhD in 2002 from IIT Kharagpur and postdoc fellow from Institute of Theoretical Physics, Goethe University, Frankfurt, Germany, 2004 to 2006. And then Max Planck Institute for Physics of Complex Systems, Dresden, Germany, from 2002 to 2004. She joined IIT Roorkee in 2008 as an assistant professor. Her research interests cater to correlated electronic materials, frustrated magnetic materials, type 2 multiferroics, superconductivity, transport properties, electronic structure calculations of noble materials. She has supervised 6 PhD candidates till date, and many are still working under her tutelage. She has published about half a century of research papers in international journals of repute. She has completed 6 research projects sponsored by various scientific bodies in India, like DST, UDCDAE, CSIR, SERP, and the like. It is a highly fortunate moment for all of us to be blessed by Dr. Metra's pearls of wisdom. I now invite Dr. Metra for enlightening us all. Ma'am, please.
Okay, thank you, Sarabjot. And I would like to thank the organizers, particularly Dr. Binod Asokan and Dr. Kiran Singh, for giving me this opportunity to present this talk here in this very nicely organized, very high quality short-term course. So it's very nice to have this kind of courses in this time, in pandemic time. So hope you are able to hear me. Am I audible, clear?
Yes, madam, you are audible.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so I will start. What I plan to discuss today is that how to model magnetic materials from first principle calculations. That I plan to discuss in today's talk. Okay, so here is the outline of my talk. First, I'll give a brief introduction to density functional theory for mainly for the students, and then I will discuss the parameters that you can derive from such calculations which can be used then for materials modeling. And then I will give 3 examples from real materials, real magnetic materials, which are of current interest. So these 3 examples that I'll give belong to 3 different classes of compounds. One is from magnetically driven type 2 multiferroics. The second one is geometrically frustrated magnetic materials, and the third one, if time permits, I will discuss this magnetic exchange driven type 2 Weyl semimetals. Okay, and then I'll summarize. Okay, so coming to density functional theory. So for a solid, if you have to do a theory, so the problem at hand is a quantum many-body problem. Okay, so we have in a solid we have electrons, we have nuclei, and a lot of them. So there are about 10 power 23 number of particles. And they are interacting with each other. So the full Hamiltonian of this quantum many-body problem is given by this. As written here. So the first term represents the kinetic energy of the nuclei. The second term represents the kinetic energy of the electrons. The third term represents the Coulomb interaction, attractive Coulomb interaction between nuclei and electrons. And then the fourth one is the repulsive Coulomb interaction between electron and electron. And the third one is again repulsive between nucleus and nucleus. Okay, so these are the terms in our Hamiltonian. This is the full Hamiltonian. Ideally, we should solve a Schrodinger equation corresponding to this Hamiltonian to find out the full many-body wave function. And this problem for a solid is extremely difficult with such a large number of interacting particles. It's extremely difficult to solve this quantum many-body problem. So we have to resort to some approximations. So first level of approximation that one applies is that in a solid, so nuclei are considered heavy, so hence they are immobile or frozen. So electrons are the only players in this many body problem. So with this approximation, we can drop the first term, which is kinetic energy of the nuclei, and the last term, which becomes also constant. So we can drop this, and so we are left with 3 terms. Okay, so these are the 3 terms that we have. So kinetic energy of the electron gas, then potential energy due to electron-electron Coulomb interaction, and the potential energy of the electrons in presence of nuclei. So these are the 3 terms that we are left with. But the problem is still too difficult to solve. So we have to apply further approximations. So generally, these are the next level of approximation that are included. One is Hartree-Fock approximation, which we all have studied in our condensed matter course, and the more modern one is the density functional theory technique, which I will discuss a little bit in more detail. And this density functional theory is based on the 2 very important theorems given by Weinberg and Kohn. Okay, so these are the 2 gentlemen who gave these 2 theorems in 1964. The first theorem says that there is a 1-to-1 correspondence between the ground state density of a many electron system and the external potential due to the nuclei. Okay, so there is a 1-to-1 correspondence, which implies that the external potential, hence the total energy, can be written as a unique functional of the ground state density. Functional is the function of a function. So it can be, the total energy can be written as a unique functional of the ground state density. So this is implied by the first theorem. And then the second theorem says that the electron density that minimizes the total energy functional is the correct ground state electron density. So the density that that minimizes this total energy functional is the correct ground state electron density. So by these 2 theorems, our life gets very much simplified. So rather than looking for the many body wave function, which depends on 3n spatial coordinates, if capital N is the total number of particles, then so this many body function, many body wave function, is a very complicated entity that rather than calculating that, one can calculate the electron density, which depends on 3 spatial coordinates, and so it is much simpler. So we come from wave function to the electron density. So how these 2 theorems can be used in practice, that was given by Kohn and Sam. There is a scheme given by Kohn and Sam, which tells us how to use these 2 theorems and make this a tool to calculate this ground state density. So this was our many body Hamiltonian, which has had 3 terms: kinetic energy, potential energy, and potential energy due to Coulomb interaction, electron-electron Coulomb interaction, and potential energy due to electron-nuclei Coulomb interaction. Okay. So this Hamiltonian, the expectation value of this Hamiltonian is the total energy, and which can be written by the first theorem as a unique functional of the density. Okay, and this total energy functional can be divided into 4 parts, as I have written here. This T0 is the non-interacting electron, the kinetic energy due to non-interacting electron gas, and the difference between exact kinetic energy of the interacting system and this non-interacting kinetic energy is what we call as correlation. So this is this VC, correlation, which is the difference between the exact kinetic energy of the interacting system minus the kinetic energy of the non-interacting system. This is what we call as electron correlation. And then we will have this Hartree contribution to due to Coulomb interaction. And the difference between exact Coulomb interaction and the Hartree contribution is the exchange term. In the Hartree-Fock theory, we use this exchange term, but there is no correlation there. Okay. So this Vx and Vc we combine and write it as a exchange correlation functional Vxc, and then we have this external potential due to nuclei. Okay, so these are the 4 terms that we have in the total energy functional. So basically what we are doing here is that we are subjecting this non-interacting classical electron gas to 2 external potentials, one due to nuclei and another due to exchange correlation effects. Okay, so here I have written the corresponding Hamiltonian, which is called the Kohn-Sum Hamiltonian, which is given by this expression here. So here the thing that we do not know is the exchange correlation part. Okay, so here we have to do an approximation. Okay, so so there are some simplest approximations that are found. Are known for this or used for this exchange correlation functionals are local density approximation and generalized gradient approximation, and there are many more such exchange correlation functions available, but these are the 2 simplest ones that are used normally in these density functional theory calculations. Okay, so once we put in this exchange correlation functional, then we can solve this Schrodinger-like equation, which is called Kohn-Sum equation, and you can calculate the single particle energy and single particle wave functions or orbitals, and from there we can calculate the density. But okay, so what we have done here is that we have reduced our many particle problem to a single particle problem of solving this Kohn-Sum equation. So these are the equations much simpler than that many body problem we initially wrote down. Okay, so this if we solve this and we can calculate these phi's, then we can calculate the density. But to solve this, we need to know the exchange correlation functional, which actually depends on the density, and also the Hartree contribution also depends on density. So we need to start with a guess density, and then we can put, use it to calculate this exchange correlation functional and the Hartree contribution part, and with that we can construct the Kohn-Sum Hamiltonian and then solve this equation and calculate the phi's, and from there we can again calculate our density, and if this density, this new density is different from the initial one that we started with, then we put it, go back and put it as input and repeat these steps again. And if when it converges or it matches with the the density of this step matches with the previous step, then we say that we have achieved the convergence or the self consistency, and then we can stop, and that becomes our ground state density. So this is a self consistency problem that we have to solve here to find out the ground state density, because these potentials depend on the density itself. So we have to start with some gas density, and then we put it in to calculate this functionals, Hartree functional and the exchange correlation functional, and we construct the this Kohn-Sum Hamiltonian, and then we can so iteratively like this we can calculate the ground state density. So once the ground state density is known, then we can calculate various ground state properties from this density functional theory. Okay, so this is the basic of the density functional theory, and there are various extension. One natural extension is the spin density functional theory, which is used for magnetic materials, which I will, we will use here. I'll give some examples of magnetic materials. So this here the density functional theory, the energy functional is a functional of both electron density as well as magnetization density. Magnetization density is the difference between the electron density with upspin electron density minus downspin electron density. So, this is your spin density functional theory, which is successfully used for magnetic materials. Then for correlated materials, it is seen that the correlation that is incorporated in the traditional density functional theory is not enough to account for the correlation. So we have to explicitly add that correlation term in the energy functional, and then we have to subtract also, because there was already some part of the correlation in the basic density functional theory, and we are adding explicitly some extra correlation. So we have to, in order not to have double counting of the correlation, we have to subtract this part. Okay, so this method, DFT plus U method, is used for correlated electronic systems, where which can give you the correct ground state electronic structure, or the band gap and all can be calculated using this DFT plus U method. Here this U can be calculated directly from there is a technique called constant DFT calculation. From there you can calculate the U, or you can use it as a variational parameter to see where the experimental results are matching with your U parameter. Okay, so you can use it as a variational parameter, or you can directly calculate from the ab initio calculations like constant DFT, or you can take it from experiments. Okay. And then there is very important extension of this density functional theory to calculate excited state property, which is the time dependent density functional theory, or TDDFT. So these are currently used for various calculating various excited state properties. Okay, and also DFT can be used as an input in various other numerical techniques, such as dynamical mean field theory, or Monte Carlo calculation, or exact diagonalization calculation. In these more sophisticated numerical methods, you can use the parameters derived from DFT, and then you can put in these more sophisticated numerical methods and calculate excited state properties, or finite temperature properties like that. Okay, so this is the basic introduction of DFT that I wanted to give you, and then so what all we can derive, what are the parameters that we can derive for constructing a model Hamiltonian from this DFT calculation. So when you do when we do electronic structure calculations, we can calculate the crystal field splitting, Jahn-Teller splitting, hopping integrals. So I will discuss some of them in next few slides. Spin and Helen state of the various ions, then magnetic exchange interactions, which are very important for magnetic materials. Then Coulomb interaction, as I said, that we can calculate it from the constant DFT calculations. And you can also determine the ground state magnetic ordering for collinear magnetic ordered state, or non-collinear magnetically ordered state. Then another thing that you can calculate is orbital ordering. You can look at the Fermi surface topology. Then you can calculate or estimate the spin orbit interaction strength. The ab initio spin orbit interaction strength can be estimated from these calculations. And further, for magnetic materials, you can also calculate antisymmetric magnetic exchange like Dzieloszynski-Moria interactions and other single ion anisotropy interaction, and all that you can calculate. Okay. So let me discuss a few of them. Suppose we are working with transition metal compounds, where the outer shell is D shell. The orbitals have this anisotropic shapes, as we all know. And when we put it in crystalline environment, like for example in octahedral environment or in tetrahedral environment, we see that the energy levels split differently depending on the crystalline environment, because this anisotropic nature of these d orbitals, due to this anisotropic nature, the electrons feel more repulsion from the ligand ions or ligand orbitals in certain directions and less in certain directions. So in octahedral environment, we see that the splitting is like this, that there are triply degenerate T2G orbitals which are having lower energy, and doubly degenerate EG orbitals which are having higher energy, whereas in tetrahedral environment we see that the splitting is opposite and the splitting is also less. So this splitting, how much the energy difference between these two states can be evaluated by doing this density functional theory electronic structure calculations. And also the another effect that is often seen when you have which is called Jahn-Teller effect. So when you have situations like this, such as we have less number of electrons than the available orbitals, which is shown here. So we have one electron in doubly degenerate EG orbital. So here what happens is that it can be shown that energy is reduced when the crystal undergoes a distortion and the one orbital becomes lower in energy and this electron goes there. Okay, so it can be shown that energetically this state is lower in energy. This is called Jahn-Teller effect. This kind of splitting also you can evaluate, and you can compare with that of crystal field splitting. So these energy scales one can determine from the DFT calculations. Okay, so another thing that we can find out is that the relative difference between crystal field energy and the Hund's coupling giving rise to high spin state, which is shown here. If the crystal field energy is less than Hund's coupling, then you will have a high spin state here, high spin state like shown here. Or if the crystal field energy is greater than Hund's coupling, then you will have a low spin state like shown here. These spin states can be determined by the density functional theory calculation. Then one can compare various energy scales in your the material under study and write down a model accordingly, model Hamiltonian accordingly. Okay. Another thing that is of interest here is that the anisotropic hopping integral, because these d orbitals are anisotropic, so the electron hopping along different direction can be different depending on the orbitals that are present in neighboring sites. For example, here you can see in this figure that this is from this orbital to this orbital, the overlap will be almost negligible, whereas if the neighboring orbitals are both similar, then we have a finite hopping. So there will be a directional dependence of hopping integrals depending on which orbital is present at the neighboring sites. Okay, so these are some of the matrix elements of hopping integrals in different directions, considering EG orbital or T2G orbital. So these hopping integrals and their magnitudes can be calculated by fitting the density DFT band structure with one-year functions, and then we can evaluate this hopping integral in different directions, which are used in model calculations. Okay, so these are the various parameters one can derive from DFT calculation for materials, and further one can also find out for magnetic materials. Like the ground state magnetic order can be determined by comparing the total energies of different magnetic states. So these are some of the magnetic states that we often see in various magnetic materials like ferromagnetic, A-type antiferromagnetic, C-type antiferromagnetic order, G-type antiferromagnetic order. So total energies can be calculated and then compared to find out the ground state. And also similarly for non-collinear magnetic orders also one can calculate the total energy and see what is the ground state. Okay. So other quantities which are useful for magnetic materials that can be calculated are these magnetic exchange interactions. This J, which is given by the difference between antiferromagnetic state and the ferromagnetic state, can be calculated by mapping the total energy difference to this kind of Heisenberg model. One can calculate this magnetic exchange interaction. Similarly, Zyloshinsky-Moria exchange interaction also can be calculated. This value of this D can be calculated, or the single ion anisotropy energy also can be calculated. These are the various exchange parameters which can be calculated from density functional theory and then can be used to write down model Hamiltonian, and then one can do finite temperature calculation or excited state property calculation using different numerical methods. Okay, so now I will come to some examples from real materials. So first one that I will talk about is this magnetically driven type 2 multiferroid compound, which is of recent interest in condensed matter physics. So first let me give a little bit of introduction about the multiferroids. As you all know, multiferroids are materials where ferromagnetism is combined with ferroelectricity. So the magnetization responds to electric field, polarization responds to magnetic field, and these materials have got huge potential for applications in magnetoelectric sensors and all. So these are of a lot of interest to condensed matter community at the moment. Okay. So these multiferroids can be classified as type 1 and type 2. So type 1 are the materials where the ferroelectricity and the magnetism are independent of each other. That means the coupling is coupling between these two orders are weak. These are some of the examples of these type 1 multiferroic compounds, where you can see that it is generally seen that the tension temperatures, ferroelectric tension temperature and the magnetic tension temperatures are both high, but the coupling between the two is weak. So it's not very sensitive to, so when we apply magnetic field to tune the polarization or electric field to tune the magnetization, the sensitivity becomes low because of this coupling being low. Though the tension temperatures are very high, so for application purposes these are very useful. So these are two of the famous compounds that have been studied a lot. And then there is this other class of compounds which have drawn recently a lot of interest because here the ferroelectricity is driven by the magnetism, or the magnetic order drives the ferroelectricity. Here the coupling is very strong between the ferroelectricity and the magnetism. The coupling is very strong, though in these materials that are found so far, the tension temperatures are seem to be low, I mean much lower compared to type 1. Okay, so the main goal is to achieve high tension temperatures here, where then one can have very good applications of these materials. So this ferroelectricity in these materials are driven by magnetic order. The ferroelectricity can be, the magnetic order can be of collinear type, or it can be non-collinear or spiral magnetic order. Okay, so I will discuss about the second class of compounds where ferroelectricity is driven by the spiral magnetic order. Okay. So the spiral magnetic order can arise in systems which are geometrically frustrated, Okay, so I will come to what is geometrical frustration in the second example. But if the system is not geometrically frustrated, then the spiral state can result from competing competing exchange interactions. If the nearest neighbor and next nearest neighbor exchange interactions are competing with each other, then also it can give rise to a spiral magnetic state. Okay. So, so this class of compounds where ferroelectricity is driven by spiral magnetic order, there are not many such compounds. Two examples are, one is this cupric oxide, where the spiral state is present between 213 Kelvin to 230 Kelvin. But this window of temperature range where the spiral state is seen is very narrow. Though in here the spiral, both the spiral magnetic order and the electric polarization is finite. In both the orders coexist in this range, but the window is very narrow. Whereas there is another compound which has come up recently, the YBACuFeO5, where the it is claimed that the it can show multiferroism at high temperature. I mean, much larger than the room temperature in polycrystalline sample. So this has been recently shown by experiment that this can be multiferroic at very high temperature. So this is a system of interest. Okay. So I would like to discuss a little bit about this compound YBACuFeO5 and the experimental observations, and we have done some calculations here, and I will discuss what all you can what are the issues that can be resolved by doing density functional theory calculations for this compound or similar compounds. Okay. So this is the crystal structure of YBACuFeO5. The space group of this material, I mean, both there are two space groups which are in the literature. So both the space groups give good fit to experimental measurements. So experiments actually cannot distinguish between these two. Where in one case the iron and copper shares the same site, and in another case they are separated. Okay, iron and copper are separated. Okay, so the both these space groups are claimed to be fitting the experiments. So so this compound undergoes two magnetic transitions. One is from paramagnetic to commensurate magnetic state at Tn1, and then from commensurate to incommensurate state. Okay, and so these are the two transition temperatures. There is a whole range being predicted by different experiments because this compound depends very much on how the sample is prepared. So there is a range of temperatures where the first transition is predicted to be. Okay, so there are basically two magnetic transitions here. Okay, so now the commensurate magnetic structure looks like this. So in the AB plane we have antiferromagnetic order, but these pins are lying in the AB plane. Okay, so and when we move along C direction, then we have antiferromagnetic, then ferromagnetic, then antiferromagnetic, ferromagnetic, like this. So this is the commensurate magnetic structure that is observed in neutron diffraction experiment. And further, the incommensurate phase was also determined by Morin and others from neutron diffraction experiment, where I'll show what is what kind of incommensurate structure they found. But in the incommensurate phase, they also find that there is a finite polarization. Okay, so this incommensurate magnetic phase is also ferroelectric, is what their observation is. So this is the incommensurate magnetic structure. What they see here is that the there is a spiral magnetic structure. When we go along C direction, the spins are canting away from each other, and then they have a spiral phase. But the spiral phase is cycloidal. Cycloidal means that we have this spin doesn't remain in the AB plane. It is out of AB plane. Okay, so it has a component along C direction. So this spiral phase is determined and to be cycloidal in this incommensurate magnetic phase in this polycrystalline sample by Morin et al. But there is another experiment on single crystal where they found that the spiral phase is not cycloidal but it is helical. So that means that the spin remains in the AB plane, but there is a canting. It cants away from the neighboring spin, but spin doesn't go out of plane. It remains in the AB plane. So this is called helical spiral state, which was seen by Lai and others in a single crystal measurement. And they also didn't find any ferroelectric response in this incommensurate phase. So these two experiments actually contradict each other. One says that in the polycrystalline sample, they see that the spiral phase is cycloidal and there is ferroelectricity, whereas in the single crystal measurement, what they find is that the spiral phase is helical and there is no ferroelectricity. So how to resolve this issue? Okay, so single crystal measurement didn't find any electric polarization, whereas the polycrystalline sample measured by, not only by Morin et al, but there are other people also who found that there is a finite polarization. Okay, so for the origin of ferroelectricity, Morin and others, they proposed this mechanism which is known as spin current mechanism, which needs that the Zalewski-Moria interaction has to be finite and the spiral state has to be cycloidal, and then one can have a finite polarization which is proportional to this quantity. If Si is the spin in ith side and Sj is the spin at jth side and Eij is the vector connecting I and j sides, then the polarization is proportional to this quantity. So is what is given by the spin current, which is called spin current mechanism. So using this spin current mechanism and the cycloidal, assuming that the cycloidal spiral state is present, Morin et al predicted that this polarization should be finite and it should be along B or in the AB plane. Okay. However, the single crystal measurement didn't find any polarization. So the issues that needs to be addressed here, that what are the strengths of various exchange interactions that are present in this material. Okay, whether there is a competing nearest neighbor and next nearest neighbor exchange interaction here or not, which can give rise to a spiral state, because this system is not geometrically frustrated. So in order to have a spiral state, one needs to have a competing exchange interaction. So one has to find out what are the exchange interaction strengths in these compounds, and also these spin current mechanism and the cycloidal spiral state needs a finite Zalewski-Moria interaction. So what is how much is Zalewski-Moria interaction in this system can also be calculated, needs to be calculated. Okay, so and then one can see what is the spiral magnetic state, whether it is helical or cycloidal. So these are and also the spin current mechanism is applicable or not. So these are the few issues that have to be addressed, and one can address these issues by doing density functional theory calculations, which we have done for this system. And what we find is that the density functional theory calculation gives you this structure as the minimum energy structure. Okay, so we considered this structure where there are bilayers of this iron and copper, and this is the commensurate magnetic structure that was found to be lowest in energy from the density functional theory calculations, where the spins are in the plane, heavy plane, and it's antiferromagnetically ordered. Okay. So now the next job is to calculate various exchange interactions. So we calculated various exchange interactions. Okay, so let's look at the first row of this table, which is for the parent compound. So this is what I will discuss now. So for the parent compound, we calculated various exchange interactions. So J1, J2, J3, J4 are same. I mean J3 and J4 are same for parent compound. Similarly, J1 and J2 are same for the parent compound. And what we find here is that these are JP1 and JP2 are the in-plane exchange interactions. So what we find is that this in-plane copper-copper exchange interaction is antiferromagnetic, and it's the strongest interaction, whereas the next nearest neighbor interaction, which is as shown here between iron and copper, the next nearest neighbor is found to be ferromagnetic in nature, but it's very small. So this ferromagnetic nature can cause frustration to this commensurate magnetic state and lead to spiral state, but the strength we see is very, very weak here. It's very small to cause sufficient frustration to get us a spiral state. Okay, so these are the observations that we can make, and we can see that there are we can see how the different exchange interactions are comparing with each other. Okay, so and also we calculated the Dzielosinski-Moria interaction, and what we found here is that all three components of the Dzielosinski-Moria interactions are negligibly small, and by calculating by performing calculations with spin orbit interaction, we found that spins actually prefer to lie in the plane rather than going out of the plane. So this is the this state is having lowest energy than and lower energy compared to spins which are out of the plane. So this is the most probable ground state structure in the incommensurate phase. And if this is the case, then the magnetic spiral state is helical rather than cycloidal. Okay, so we established that this state is spiral state is not cycloidal, but it is helical. Okay, and if it is helical, and then the spin current mechanism cannot give finite polarization, because so this is SI and this is SJ, and this is the SI cross SJ vector, and this EIJ vector is parallel to this. So EIJ cross SI cross SJ will become then 0. So there cannot be any finite polarization if the magnetic spiral state is helical. Okay. So these results are matching well with the single crystal measurement. So we believe that in the polycrystalline sample there is a role of disorder that actually brings these spins out of plane and then gives rise to the finite polarization there in the polycrystalline sample. But if in the single crystal case, because this spin state is spiral state is helical, so spin current mechanism cannot give rise to a finite polarization. Okay, so this kind of this is what we resolved from our calculations. We also did some calculations. How much time I have? Okay. Hello, I think I have some time, so I will. I would like to discuss further on this compound. We also did some calculations for the strontium doped compound, which was recently, some experiments were done recently from IIT Mandi group, S. Lal and others done these calculations where they saw that if you dope strontium at the barium site, then the transition temperature, the incommensurate phase transition temperature increases with doping. Okay, from 205, they can raise it up to 380 Kelvin. Because this incommensurate phase, if it is associated with a finite polarization, then if this transition temperature can be raised, then this becomes a very good thing for application purpose. If the transition temperature is high and the compound contains polarization, then you can have multiferrocity at room temperature, which is very good for application purpose. So we also looked at the effect of this doping on the exchange interaction. So here we dope the system by this strontium at various dopings 0.25, 0.5, 0.75 and fully doped by strontium, and we calculated all the exchange interactions for various dopings, and we see that with doping it changes, it has significant change. The exchange interaction changes with doping and also reverses its trend when it is beyond 0.5. Okay, so using this exchange interactions at various dopings, we calculated, we did some finite temperature calculation using quantum Monte Carlo, and we calculated, we considered a Heisenberg spin model and considered a cubic lattice and did this quantum Monte Carlo calculations, and we calculated magnetic susceptibility and specific heat to look at how the transition temperature varies with the doping, and this plot shows how this TN1 varies with doping, and we see that up to 0.5 it increases and then it decreases. Okay, so these are some of the conclusions that we make from our study. So the magnetic spiral state is helical and not cycloidal in the parent compound, and the Zyloshinsky-Moria interaction is exceedingly small. This rules out its role in inducing ferroelectricity in the system. Spin current model also fails if there is helical spiral state, and our results or observations are in good agreement with single crystal measurement. And then strontium doping affects the magnetic exchange interaction significantly, leading to A-side doping control transition temperature variations seen in experiment. So by using this first principle calculations, you can basically measure various exchange interactions that are there, and with that you can construct a model Hamiltonian, which then can be used for doing finite temperature calculations for real materials. Okay, so this is one example that I wanted to discuss, and the next one is these geometrically frustrated magnetic materials, which we have been interested for some time now. So what is geometric frustration? So geometric frustration happens when the lattice is such that all the interactions across all the bonds is not satisfied simultaneously. So if I consider a bipartite lattice where there is no elementary triangle, then if I consider Ising spins with antiferromagnetic interaction, then we see that across all the bonds the interaction is satisfied. Whereas if I consider a non-bipartite lattice where there are these elementary triangles, then the interaction, the antiferromagnetic interaction across all the bonds are not satisfied, cannot be satisfied simultaneously. If I put the up spin here, then this bond will be ferromagnetic, So hence it will remain frustrated. If I put a down spin here, then this bond will be ferromagnetic and hence will remain frustrated. So this kind of frustration is called geometric frustration due to lattice, and this actually then gives rise to a large degeneracy in the ground state. This frustration can be relieved often by lattice distortion or orbital ordering or doping, etc. So this is the triangle I was explaining, and this is the tetrahedron, which is the 3D counterpart of this triangle, which is also geometrically frustrated. And if you have a system where there is no geometric frustration, one can have frustration also due to competing interactions. Okay, suppose we consider a one-dimensional lattice, then if the neighboring nearest neighbor interaction is ferromagnetic, and the next nearest neighbor interaction is antiferromagnetic, and if they are comparable with each other, J2 and J1, then the spin chain will be frustrated. Okay. And you can also have frustration on a square lattice. For example, if your J1 and J2 are competing with each other, then also one can have frustrated interactions. Okay, so here the frustration is not due to geometry of the lattice, but due to interactions. Okay, so this one can have on a non-geometrically frustrated lattice. Okay, so coming to this class of compounds, which are known as spinel vanadates or spinels in general. The spinel crystal structure, the chemical formula is AB2O4, where A site is tetrahedrally coordinated by oxygen, shown here, and B site is octahedrally coordinated by oxygen, and the B sites further form a pyrochlore lattice, which is a network of coordinate sharing tetrahedra, as shown here. So this tetrahedron is also geometrically frustrated. Okay, so this lattice here is geometrically frustrated, and we have, in our case, in spinel vanadate, we have vanadium as the B site ion, which is in 3+ state. So we have two d electrons here, which is in high spin state because of large Hund's coupling. So the spin degree of freedom is active, and because there are 3 orbitals and 2 electrons, so the orbital degree of freedom is also active here. It's not frozen. So in these compounds, there is a very interesting interplay between spin degree of freedom, orbital degree of freedom, and lattice, which is geometrically frustrated. And because these are transition metal compounds, the Coulomb correlation is also very strong. So there is a strong interplay between all these degrees of freedom, giving rise to very interesting transitions. There are multiple magnetic and structural transitions seen in these compounds. Okay, so one can divide these spinel vanadates into different categories depending on the nature of A site ion. If A site is non-magnetic and orbitally inactive, then we have these compounds MgV2O4, ZnV2O4, or CdV2O4. Then we see that there is one structural transition and one magnetic transition. The structural transition is from cubic to tetragonal, and there is a magnetic transition from paramagnetic to collinear ferrimagnetic state. Okay, so when the A site is magnetic but orbitally inactive, like MnV2O4, there we see that there is one structural transition from cubic to tetragonal phase, but 2 magnetic transitions, one from paramagnetic to collinear ferrimagnetic state, and then from collinear ferrimagnetic to non-collinear magnetic state at a lower temperature. And that is the most interesting one is this FeV2O4, which is where the A site is both magnetic and orbitally active. Fe is in +2 state, so it's also orbitally active. So here we see that there are 3 structural transitions and 2 magnetic transitions. So there are several structural magnetic transitions in this compound because of competition between various degrees of freedom. Okay, and the non-collinear magnetic state was observed by this neutron diffraction experiment, where they see, particularly for Fe2O4, there is a state which is called 2-in 2-out structure. So it looks like this. And MnV2O4 case, there is this non-collinear structure which is not exactly 2-in 2-out, but it is similar. Okay, so these are the non-collinear magnetic ground state that are seen in these compounds from the experiment. So the two, there are 2 important issues which needs to be resolved here. One is that these compounds, these vanadates, spinel vanadates, this vanadium ion, the magnetic moment is much smaller than expected 2 mu b, which is expected from theoretically for a V3 plus state. If there is V3 plus state, then there are 2 electrons present, so it should be 2 mu b. But we see that in experiments, the moment is found to be much lower, even lower than 1 mu b. So this is not understood why this is so low. If we do traditional DFT calculations, then we find that the moment comes out to be around 1.5 to 2 mu b. Okay. In case of zinc vanadate, we had shown earlier that this compound has a high spin orbit coupling, which gives rise to a very high negative orbital moment, and which then cancels out the part of the spin moment, giving rise to a low magnetic moment. Okay. But these MnV2O4 and FeV2O4, the experiments and the DFT calculations indicate that this spin orbit interaction is not very high in these compounds. So there is no high orbital moment or cancellation of the spin moment by orbital moment. So what is then causing the lower moments in these 3 compounds? So to resolve this, we recently performed calculations using a newly developed exchange correlation functional, which is known as source-free exchange correlation functional. What is done here is that the spin density functional theory Hamiltonian, which is given here, can be written as this, where there is the spin part of the potential can be the potential can be divided into 2 parts. One is the spinless part, and another, the spin part, can be written as this in terms of a magnetic field. But this magnetic field is not a constant magnetic field, so it can have a finite value of finite divergence. Okay, so whereas the physical magnetic fields are not unconstant. So what is done here in the source-free exchange correlation functional is that this magnetic field is made source-free. That means so that it can be written as a curl of a vector potential. Okay. So to make it source-free, one can solve this Poisson equation and find out this phi, and adding to this existing magnetic field, one can add to this del phi, and one can construct a new exchange correlation magnetic field, which then becomes source free. Okay, so by using this method, the exchange correlation functional was made source free, and which we used for our systems. And what we find is that by using the source-free exchange correlation functional, we were able to derive the low or the source-free calculation. We found that the moment is really moment is low and it matches with experiment for all three systems. Okay, so not only the low moment we find, also the vanadium Canting angle in the non-collinear ground state. We find that the Canting angle also matches the experimental values, and this is the complete non-collinear magnetic state that was calculated from by our calculation. And where we could derive this 2-in-2 out structure for FeV2O4 and COV2O4, and the structure which was found for MnV2O4 also matches very well with the experimentally observed one. Okay, so we could therefore explain or describe the non-collinear magnetic state using this source-free exchange correlation functional in the density functional theory. Both the magnetic moments as well as the canted magnetic state could be described by using this new exchange correlation function. Further, we also calculated the orbital order by looking at the orbital occupation of the different orbitals. So here in the vanadium we have 3+ states. So there are 2 d electrons in the T2g orbitals. So due to compression along c direction, one electron goes to the xy orbital. So xy orbital is occupied in all the sides. The other orbital can alternate between yz and xz. Okay, so this gives rise to the orbital order, and which we find here that this orbital order is A-type orbital ordering, as shown here. That when you in the AB plane we have all same orbitals, but when we move along c direction, we go from yz to xz to yz to xz again. Okay, so this is called A-type orbital order. Similar to the A-type magnetic order, one can have A-type orbital order, which we find for this FeV2O4 and MnV2O4. Whereas the COV2O4, there is no structural transition, so there is no orbital order seen in the cubic phase. Okay, so this COV2O4 is unique in the sense that COV2O4 doesn't undergo any structural transition. It remains in the cubic phase, and some time back we had done some calculation considering the cubic phase in this COV2O4, and because of this cubic phase, this compound is considered to be more electronic itinerancy is more here compared to the other vanadiates. And also in experiment it has been seen that with application of pressure it goes to a metallic state. Okay, so this thing we did some density functional theory calculation for this cubic phase on COV2O4, and what we find here is that out of the 2 electrons, one electron goes to this localized state and the other electron remains in the itinerant state, okay, which is more delocalized. So this is the electronic structure calculated within the J plus U approximation, and what we see is that one orbital is localized and another orbital, actually there are two more orbitals, so these 2 orbitals are more delocalized. So one electron remains in this delocalized state and one remains in the localized state. So one can based on this one can write down a Fallikov-Kimball model, which is shown here, which is written here, with 2 itinerant bands. So So we have this. This is the kinetic energy of this delocalized electron, and this is the energy of the localized electron, and this is the interaction between localized and delocalized electron. Due to this interaction, one can get this insulating state, and this interaction will increase when the pressure is applied, and which will cause the hybridization between localized and itinerant state, which will then increase this. This interaction will be affected by this hybridization, giving rise to a metallic state. So one can explain this metal to insulator transition or insulator to metal transition under pressure through this Fallikov-Kimber-like model for this vanadate. Okay, so one more thing I would like to discuss about this compound is the spin phonon coupling in MnV2O4. Okay. So in experiment, in Raman's scattering experiment done by Glisson and others, it was seen that there is some anomaly in the temperature dependence of the one of these modes, which is this. These are the 2-magnon modes, they call it. So this 2-magnon mode has a anomalous temperature dependence, whereas these 1-magnon modes are having normal temperature dependence. So when we increase the temperature, the magnons, because the spin correlation will decrease, so the this energy should decrease. Whereas here we see that energy is increasing when we increase the temperature. So this anomaly was attributed to spin phonon coupling in this material. Okay. So we wanted to look at the spin phonon interaction. So one can write down Heisenberg spin Hamiltonian for this compound MnV2O4, where this is the first term is the interaction between manganese spin and the vanadium spin, which is antiferromagnetic. So this Jij is antiferromagnetic exchange interaction between manganese and vanadium, whereas this J prime is the ferromagnetic exchange between the vanadium. So this is describes the ferrimagnetic state seen in manganese vanadate. This Heisenberg spin Hamiltonian describes that. Okay. So due to spin phonon coupling, this exchange interaction can change, will be affected, and one can write down write down the change in the due to spin phonon coupling as a Taylor series expansion, as I have written here, where these U's are the displacements of the ions. Okay. So the shift in the phonon frequency can then be related to this the second order term, and the shift in the frequency can be calculated from the density functional theory from the phonon spectrum for different magnetic state. We can calculate the phonon spectrum for different magnetic state, and we can calculate the shift in the frequency at different points in the Brillouin zone. Okay. So which we have plotted here, and we see that there are this is one mode which is softening with the change in magnetic state, whereas this mode is hardening with the change in the magnetic state. So there are this mode is at zone center at gamma point, and this is at N, which is zone boundary. Okay. So the different modes are affected differently by this change in the magnetic state. So this shift can, because it is connected to this spin phonon coupling, we can directly use it and do a Ginzburg-Landau-like theory. This is the free energy for Ginzburg-Landau theory, where we have this M is the ferrimagnetic order parameter, A and B are the usual Ginzburg-Landau parameters, and this V lambda is the amplitude of lambda at phonon mode, and this is the term which was there without any magnetic order. When the magnetic order at low temperature magnetic order sets in, then we have this term, which and in addition to these terms. Okay. So the new frequency can be calculated due to the magnetic ordering. The new frequency can be calculated, and which can be written down in terms of this delta lambda, and which we can calculate from DFT. Okay, so here we can calculate from DFT this delta lambda, and M, the temperature dependence of the magnetic order parameter, can be taken from experiment as well as from some models where we have. What we have done here is that we have taken the temperature dependence of this magnetic order parameter as a function of temperature like this, where beta is the critical exponent. This is the mean field behavior, and this is the 3D Heisenberg model behavior, and this one solid line is the experimental one, and the shifts were calculated from the DFT. And then we calculated the new frequency, temperature dependence of the phonon mode. So what we see here is that for the this mode at around 180 centimeter, which is this one, where there is a softening of phonon mode due to change in magnetic state. So this one gives rise to temperature dependence exactly like what we saw in the experiment for this 2 magnon mode, whereas this one, which is around 70 degree, which is around 70 centimeter inverse, gives rise to a temperature dependence, which is like that we have seen in the 1 magnon mode temperature dependence. Okay. So this anomalous behavior thus can be explained by considering the softening of phonon modes due to spin phonon coupling in this system. Okay, so these are the things one can do using DFT calculations, and further the DFT derived parameters can be used for for a model, like one can write down a one can do a Ginzburg-Landau theory like model, and or any other model calculation one can do to explain various finite temperature properties. Okay. So summarizing this part, non-collinear magnetic order and low vanadium moment values in these compounds FeV2O4 and MnV2O4 and CoV2O4 are correctly reproduced using density functional theory with source free exchange correlation functional, and anomalous temperature dependence of 2 magnon peak in MnV2O4 observed in Raman scattering experiment was explained by considering the spin phonon coupling. Okay, so I think I have a little bit more time. Probably I can go through the last one, last example that I wanted to show. So this is about the magnetic order driven type 2 Weyl semi-metals. So I'll talk about this compound UCD2AS2. So these are this compound belongs to a class of compounds which are known as 1,2,2 ternary intermetallic compounds, and these compounds have two structures. One is this THCr2Si2 type structure, which is commonly seen. These high TC superconductors, these iron peptides, mostly belong to this structure. Whereas rarely there is another rarely seen structure which is trigonal in nature, Ca2Si2 type structure is called. This compounds, this EuCd2S2 belongs to this structure, this one, which is more rare. So this is the crystal structure of EuCd2S2, where these Eu ions make a triangular lattice. Okay, so these are the Eu ions, the moment sitting on a triangular lattice, and this Eu is in 2+ valence state with 7 electrons. So there is a large moment sitting here, and so this is the lattice. These are the lattice constant values for this compound. Okay, this compound undergoes a magnetic phase transition from paramagnetic to antiferromagnetic phase at 9.5 Kelvin, as seen here in this experiment. But because this Eu absorbs neutron, it was not possible to determine the exact magnetic ground state for this compound. Okay, so one proposal was that it was made from this charge transport measurements, that when you look at the charge transport measurement in this compound, what we see is that this charge transport depends on the magnetic order. Okay, this charge transport and magnetic order are correlated. So exactly at the magnetic transition, we also see a peak in the resistivity, and then the ratio of rho AB upon rho C, the anisotropy, actually rises below this transition temperature. So along C direction, it seems that there is more scattering along C direction than in the AB plane. Based on that, it was proposed that this could have A-type antiferromagnetic structure with moments pointing along C direction. But it was not known exactly what is the ground state magnetic order here. Okay. So what we did is we calculated various magnetic structures. I mean total energies for various magnetic structures like paramagnetic structure, then C prime, G prime, and A-type antiferromagnetic structure with spin moments pointed along various directions. And what we find here is that there is competing energies for ferromagnetic and A-type antiferromagnetic state. Though A-type antiferromagnetic state is the ground state, but ferromagnetic state has a competing energy. I mean, if we see here that the ferromagnetic state is very close to this difference is only about 2 to 3 MeV. So it's very close to the ground state, this ferromagnetic state. And there is a magnetic anisotropy, and what we find is that the ground state is actually A-type antiferromagnetic, but spins do not point along C direction, but they point along B direction. This is our observations. This was our observation, and then this experiment came, which was this resonant elastic X-ray scattering experiment, and they indeed found exactly what we observed from our calculation, that the spins are lying in the AB plane, not along C direction. And one can actually do the electronic structure calculation, and what one sees is that there are this is the electronic structure is semi-metallic in nature with electron and hole pocket. This is the Fermi surface, and further one can see that there are these interesting points where one can see this while point just below Fermi level when these spins are pointing along C direction, and this is gapped when these spins are pointing along B direction. Okay, so this is similar to the non-magnetic counterpart, which is CD3S2, which hosts this Dirac semi-metallic state. And this was indeed established by experiment. They did Stowe and others did APS experiments, and they found that in the ferromagnetic state, with spins pointing along C direction, they find 2 wild points at the Fermi level. And this ferromagnetic state is actually very close. I mean, it's actually can be driven by a very small magnetic field, which is 1.6 Tesla. So from A-type antiferromagnetic state, this is the ground state, one can go to the ferromagnetic state by applying this small magnetic field, which is also corroborates our observation that the ferromagnetic state is very close by in energy to the A-type antiferromagnetic state. And then later on, a detailed electronic structure calculations was done by Wang and others, where they looked at various magnetic states we had considered, and they calculated the chirality of these wild points, and they found that indeed there are a pair of wild points there at the Fermi level in the ferromagnetic state. Okay. So let me then summarize this part. The A-type antiferromagnetic state which spins along crystallographic A or B axis is found to be the ground state. And FM state, the ferromagnetic state, is found to be energetically very close to the ground state, which is A-type antiferromagnetic. And the semi-metallic electronic structure can host Dirac or wild fermions driven by magnetic exchange. This is what we have found from our calculations. Okay. So before I finish, I would like to acknowledge my collaborators, Jyoti Krishna, who was my former PhD student. He is currently doing postdoc at Arizona State University. And Dibyendu De, who is also at Arizona State University. They are the ones who have done the calculations that I presented. And then Sangeeta Sharma, Nisha Singh from Max Born Institute, Berlin, J.K. Dewhurst in Max Planck Institute, Halle, Nikev Gross from Max Planck Institute, Halle, and S. Hallgross from University of Erlangen, Germany. So this we have collaborated with this German group for doing this source-free exchange correlation calculation that I presented, and for this spin phonon calculations, we have collaborated with Umesh Wagmare from Jain Center, Bangalore, and Arko Tarabdar from IIT Kharagpur. And we have collaborated with this for this YBA CUA205. The experimental data was provided to us by Chandrasekhar Yadav from IIT Mandi. So I'd like to thank all of you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Tulika Maitra, for a very informative talk on magnetic modeling of material from first principle calculations. We have broadly discussed a very broad area of different class compounds. It is magnetically driven type 2 multiferroic, geometrically frustrated spinel vanadates, and the third, the magnetic exchange driven weld semi-metal. So now the presentation is open for questions. If there is any questions.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
Ma'am, as we know that the true exchange correlation functional is not known in DFT. So which exchange correlation functional should we use? For example, in the calculation of band structure, I was doing in my MSc work. While using LD approximation, we found the material to be a conductor, and with GGA it was found semiconductor.
Yes, I mean,
so
you
how
have
can
to,
we trust that which?
Yeah, you have to do because the exchange correlation functional is not known. Whichever exchange correlation functional gives you the gives you results which are better match with the experiment is the one that to be chosen. Okay. So you have to, we have to do calculations and match with experiment. Whichever matches well, you can use that. I mean, that is the optimum exchange correlation function for that system. So there is no universal exchange because we do not know. I mean, so these are all approximate exchange correlation functional. So whichever matches well with the experiment for the particular system, you have to use that. So you have to for metallic system generally the local density approximation does very well, but for correlated systems or like for insulating materials, the local density approximation is not doesn't do very well. So we then there probably one has to use GGA or some other meta GGA or hybrid functional. There are other functionals which has to be used.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Another question is that in using the DFT plus U method, you said that we will put in the correlation energy. How will we calculate that correlation energy?
Yeah, I mean correlation, and I mean there is this. If you have seen Hubbard model, for example, there is a Hubbard U term there. U Ni up, Ni down. Okay, so that is basically the on-site Coulomb correlation between spin up and if suppose you have one orbital at a particular site and it can contain 2 electrons, one spin up, one spin down, and the Coulomb repulsion between them is represented by this U Ni up, Ni down. I is the site, on-site Coulomb interaction. That is basically so that U. As I said, U can be calculated from first principle. There are some methods called constant LDA, constant DFT calculation that can be used for U, or you can just use it as a variational parameter. You vary this U value and see where your band gap, for example, is matching with the experimental one, or you can, you can vary it to see that in a range of, you can vary this U value in a range, and then see where it matches well. That is one way, or one can take it from experiment also. Suppose you can do inverse photo emission experiment. So from there you can find out some estimate of U value.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yes, any other question?
Excuse me.
Hello, ma'am. This is Satya. Thank you very much for a very nice presentation. Ma'am, I have certain questions. I just wanted to know the spin density functional theory or DFTU, which will give a better result for multiferroics.
Spin density functional theory anyway you have to use because multiferroics is magnetic, right? You have
yes.
So magnetism is there. You have to use anyway spin density functional theory. Then the correlation you have to use if you are suppose you are considering a multiferroic which is correlated material which contains either transition metal or some other D or F shell elements you are considering. Then so if you are considering correlated materials, then you have to use U plus U, DFT plus U, and magnetic, spin density functional theory anyway you have to use, so you have to use spin density functional theory plus U. Okay.
Okay. Ma'am, and what are the constant DFT calculations you were talking about to get U? Because generally I got U from literature or, by varying it like for magnetic MN systems and things like that. But I don't get the constant DFT functions calculations which you talked about.
Technique, it's difficult to explain this way, but it's called constrained LDA or constrained DFT function. Functionally, I think you can get it from the literature. It's available there. Because it's it's a method which has to be then. It's difficult to explain this way. Okay.
Ma'am, is it constrained
Constrained,
LDA or
yeah,
constant
no, not
DFT?
constant. It is constrained.
Oh, yes, yes. Okay, then thank you. Yes, yes, yeah.
Constrained.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Next
Ma'am,
question.
sir,
Ankush, please,
one more-
please. Yes.
just a small question. Ma'am, which code are you using for the finite temperature QMC calculation?
QMC calculation, there is one code called ALPS, which is the open source code, where ALPS, ALPS. Okay. So that there you can, as an input, you can give your lattice structure and also your interactions. I mean the model Hamiltonian you have to give there, and then one can calculate. Yeah, one can do quantum Monte Carlo or exact diagonalization or DMRG. There are various other numerical methods can be done by that code. There is, yeah, that is freely available actually. Open source.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Binod, good evening, ma'am. Very nice talk. I have many questions, but I let other participants to ask the question. If there is no more question, then I will ask a few questions.
Hello. Ma'am, I kind of have a very basic question. So, right. So, like when you're considering the various, say, phases of the magnetic moments, like let's say the antiferromagnetic phases and all in the various examples you showed. So, like, how do you start with your initial structure? Like, are you like starting with initial configuration of these phases and then calculating which is like more favorable, or do you start with any configuration and then the DFT code kind of predicts that no, this phase is actually less energetic than that phase?
No, I mean we are calculating. We are calculating. We are considering different phases and then calculating their total energies, and then we use. We compare them. Okay. Yeah. So it directly doesn't take you through the ground state continuously. You can calculate different states and then compare their energies. So that's what we have done.
And also, how are you assigning these, should I say, fit phases? Like,
Assigning what?
it can be done through various softwares, but then after that, how do you assign like which atom has which electron has which spin, or which atom has which spin?
Which atom has? I couldn't understand last part of your question. Can you repeat?
Right. So you had shown like various structures which were in different spin configurations. So like,
Yeah.
so like which software did you use to like get those spin configurations? Because getting the geometry is easy from various softwares like Gaussian or Avogadro. So, but then how do you assign the spins after that?
Assigning spin. So you're saying how do I assign magnetic states, different magnetic states?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. That is also, when you are using spin density functional theory, course like which implements the spin density functional theory, there are then different magnetic states. You can, you can assign a magnetic moment direction there. Okay. So whether you can make it collinear with along some crystallographic axis, or you can make it non-collinear. You can assign different magnetic magnetization components like mx, my, mz, and then to that that's possible. Basically, there that is possible within this spin density functional theory.
Okay.
Ma'am, are you using the VASP software, ma'am?
Yeah, VASP also, yeah, we are using that.
Okay, and these calculations were done using which software?
We used different softwares actually. I showed you results using VASP also, and also from the VN2K and from this ELK software. So we have used different the source free calculations. We have for that we have used this ELK software, and for this last compound we have used VN2K, and the multiferroic one we have used we have done with FAST. Okay, so
Thank you so much, ma'am.
So any other question from the participant side? Okay, so no more question. If Dr. Kiran, if you want to ask, then after that we'll
Yeah.
Dr. Kiran.
Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for a nice talk, and you covered different materials, multifluorics. So first of all, I'm very happy to see that you choose this yttrium barium copper iron system, because the experimental work you showed by Gunde, who showed that electric polarization in this system. But I explored all the series of this compound, and I could not see the electric polarization. So I am very happy to see that it is not a ferroelectric. And because this electric polarization measurement is very tricky, ma'am. So sometimes it can give you the wrong information due to the leakage current. So I'm really very happy to see that your theoretical calculation shows that it is not a polar material. My question is, ma'am, and another one you choose this iron vanadate, and I'm happy to say that we are the first who reported the multiferricity in this group, in this material when I was doing the postdoc, FeV2O4. Ma'am, I want to know that in one of the compound you show that there is a change in the conductivity, cobalt vanadate, with the application of pressure.
Yes.
So my question is, have you looked for the change in the spin state of cobalt in the presence of pressure, or it is?
No, it happens where it happens. This change in conductivity, this metallic state, is actually happens in the in the ferrimagnetic state actually. So the spin doesn't change, spin state doesn't change. It remains ferrimagnetic, but it becomes metallic. Though the resistivity is high, much higher compared to good metals. So this is this can be said that it is a correlated metal basically. So the spin state, we have considered ferrimagnetic spin state there, but we consider this localized electron and delocalized electron. I mean, the interaction between, Marikov-Kimball like interaction between them, between one itinerant electron and one localized electron. So which gives rise to the insulating nature. It is actually insulating, but it becomes metallic with pressure. So with pressure, what will happen is that this hybridization between localized state and the itinerant state will increase, and that will then that can be shown through this model. As a function of this hybridization, that one goes from insulating to metallic state. Staying in the same.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, ma'am, because I am doing experiment and you are exploring all these things with the theoretical calculation and other things. Ma'am, I want to know that in case of MnV2O4, you have mentioned that they have said that there is the presence of manganone and they are changing. So my question is, by your DFT calculation or any other theoretical modeling, can you predict the predict that in this material there will be possibility of manganone?
Yeah, I mean, for that, for manganone calculation, one has to do, one has to use this time-dependent density functional theory for excited state. What we are doing is, we are presently doing ground state property calculation. For manganone calculation, one has to do this. One has to do time-dependent TDDFT calculation to see the, how the manganone excitations and their properties. Okay, so it's an excited state property. But what we did here is that we calculated, assuming that there is a coupling between spin and phonon. we calculated what is the shift in frequency by changing the magnetic state. When you go from ferromagnetic to ferrimagnetic state, what is the shift in frequency, in the phonon frequency?
Yeah, I agree that in case of spin phonon coupling, at the magnetic transition, you can have the shift in the frequency of the Raman mode. But saying that it's a magnon, I think with Raman, it is not so easy to conclude that they are magnon, because for that one need to do some terahertz spectroscopy, and then they can confirm. But if you can predict it, I have some interesting material, and maybe I will look forward to be in contact with you to explore this magnon in some particular materials.
I mean, magnon, of course, I mean, these experiments, they say that this is two magnon or one magnon. We didn't say anything like that. From our calculation, we didn't say, I mean, we cannot say whether it is magnon or not, that we cannot say. But the temperature dependence, I mean, can be explained by this spin phonon coupling is what we say. These are magnon. It was said by this experimental group. They identified them as two magnon, one magnon modes by some analysis. Okay, so.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you very much for such a nice talk, and we will be in contact in future. Thank you, Vinod.
Yeah, okay. So thank you once again, Professor Tulika, for accepting our invitation. Thank you for the wonderful talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was a real pleasure for me. Yeah.
Thank you, madam. Thank you so much.
Wish you a very successful, I mean, remaining part of this course.
Okay. Thank you, madam. Thank you. Thank you. So, so tomorrow, third day, we have two talk. In the morning session, we will be having Professor S.P. Das from GNU, New Delhi, and in the evening talk,